Welcome to A Future of Healthy Aging. I'm Paul Irving, and welcome specifically to the day after an interesting series of political events that I think maybe bear some conversation as we think about priorities in public health going forward. I want to introduce our panelists, and you have their bios in your book. Robin Mockenhaupt from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Freda Lewis Hall from Pfizer, Linda Fried, who is the Dean of the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia, and Hasi Cohen, who's the Dean of the Davis School of Gerontology at University of Southern California. So thanks so much to all of you for being with us. So I suspect all of us here share one characteristic when it comes to public health, and that is that we probably have each other at hello. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think that public health was a priority. But even within public health, there's the question of how our values and priorities are expressed in policy and practice and philanthropy and in business. And I would say that as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about how we deal with older adults, public health may be of interest to this group, but the question is, are older adults an interest to this group? So I guess let me be provocative and start with you, Linda. We certainly care about public health, but why should we care about older adults?
That's the key question. I don't know, is my mic on? Good afternoon or good morning. I guess it's still morning. So one day somebody walked into my office many years ago and said I should care about this. And I said, probably don't bother me, I'm busy. And then I went back and looked at the data and changed my mind. So how many of you are planning to live till 70? Raise your hands. Anybody planning to live till 80? Raise your hand. How about 90? 100. Okay, that's why we care about it. But there are a couple of other points maybe to make. One is that the greatest public health success in the history of the world is a result of intentional investment by societies in public health, which has raised our life expectancy from 47 at birth 100 years ago. At birth, you could expect to live 47 years on the average, if you're lucky, to over 80 now and going up. That is a huge success of public health. And now the question is what we're going to do with it, because we're all in for this ride. So how do we now add life to years, and by doing that, I mean, years, add health to years, and by doing that, how do we intentionally build to unlock the opportunities of these longer lives? This is a life stage we haven't built before. We have this amazing opportunity to design a whole new 30-year stage of life. If there's a amazing moment in human history, this could be it. And what do we want out of it? Health is going to be the key, but I would say that there is huge evidence now that not only are older people the only increasing natural resource in the entire world, but that if we invest in the institutions and the organizations that help us stay active, engaged, and contributing, that we could contribute to a success of society for all ages that we previously couldn't have imagined. Because we also know that older people individually have huge amounts, not only to contribute, but they want to contribute after a lifetime of learning, experience, success, and a lot to share, but the desire to give back and leave the world better than they found it. So we have a huge opportunity to unleash. I call that the opportunity for a third demographic dividend, which means building for this new stage of life so we can benefit, not just from everybody in this room who raised their hands, who's going to be around, but for the whole population that also will be there with us.
So thanks, Linda. So Robin, if older adults represent this incredible, underutilized, underrecognized human capital asset, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is focused on now spreading and scaling this message of a culture of health, which maybe you'll talk a bit about. And of course, if the impacts of chronic disease are manifested in older adults more rapidly, they involve near-term not only personal burdens, but obviously great societal cost. What's the interaction between this notion of culture of health and aging? I mean, how do we get the news out that keeping older adults healthy is a priority, and how do we begin the process of changing behavior?
Great. So let me go to Linda's question about those of you who want to live to 70, 80, 90, and I even saw some hands for 100 and older. There's one back there. So how do you envision your life would be at that age, whatever age you chose in your mind? Do you see yourself in a nursing home? Do you see yourself with a chronic illness or disability? Do you see yourself living in your home? Do you see yourself with your family surrounding you? Do you see yourself being healthy or not? And I think it's that vision of what we would want for each of ourselves in our futures that's really important when we think about healthy aging. We know the problems of aging, and we talk about the challenges of aging. But I hope what we'll talk about on this panel is what are the opportunities as well and the solutions, so that we, at the age of whatever you chose, may not be in a place that you wouldn't want to be in, that you may be as healthy as you possibly can, have the opportunities to live a quality of life, to live a life where you're able to manage the disease and disabilities you have and to function as well as you can in your environment. That's what we all want for ourselves. And we see that at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation as being part of what building a culture of health is all about. What is that idea? The idea is that every single person, no matter your age, your gender, what color race you are, your ethnic heritage, your income, that you have the opportunity to live the healthiest life that you possibly can. You know, we're all individuals. We all come to this world with a different package of characteristics, genetics, et cetera. But what is the healthiest way that you can possibly live? And that's the vision for the future of healthy aging that I think is really important. And I think that the idea of a culture of health applies very much to this idea of healthy aging. You know, what we see is, and it's a little bit of what Linda started talking about, which is how can we improve this idea of aging and make it as healthy as possible, as productive, as meaningful as possible for people? So how can we have a shared value of the importance of healthy aging? Secondly, how can we build healthy communities so that older adults and others in the community can live in places that support them, environments that support them? Many people want to live in their own home, but even if they can't, can they live in an environment that allows them to be independent with the kind of quality of life that they want? How can we collaborate as organizations, as parts of society, to be able to focus on, instead of just thinking about cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's, or think about public health and doctors' offices, how can we collaborate together to be able to solve some of these problems? And then finally, how do we bridge health and healthcare so that we can really help those who need healthcare get it, have access to it, get the kind of care that they need? So that's part of what, when we talk about a culture of health, what we mean. And older adults are woven through that whole picture. One of the things that I do want to touch on, and maybe we can come back to it though, is how much we invest in this idea of a future of healthy aging. We all want to be there. We see ourselves there, but collectively, are we investing in it? So we'll come back to that a little bit more.
But it raises an interesting question that I want to ask Freda. So Freda, Robin alluded to this notion of an ecosystem focused on aging. I know when I go out and talk about this, I'm often talking to people who look somehow like me, we know that boomers are very focused on changing the culture of aging, but aging is really the one thing we all have in common if we're lucky. I know you think about aging very much as a life course question. So is aging just something that folks should be thinking about as they approach a traditional retirement, or
I do. I think I think as an ecosystem that's focused on aging, we probably, I'm looking at the kind of title of this, A Future of Healthy Aging. I think we have a definition issue. First of all, on aging, I have a 2-year-old grandson, and when I look at him, I'm horrified at the notion that he'll have a shorter lifespan than myself or my daughter. I have a 97-year-old father that could probably dance most of you under the table still. And I think of him as aging, but also as aged. And I think we kind of cast our sights at the far end of the age spectrum as the focus on aging. But I'm as focused on ensuring that my grandson is eating the right foods and not adopting risky behaviors and not doing things that as he ages are going to put him in the snares that often get us as we age. So I think, first of all, to redefine aging as, kind of a full-on life course, and to set our sights in public health, in the practices that we do in our healthcare system, in the work that we do in the biopharmaceutical industry, which is where I am, is not focusing on this far end, but instead to focus on prevention and wellness opportunities for the life course. The second is our definition of healthy. We talk a lot about the fact that we live longer. I get reminded with many people that are interfaced with that we don't really live longer, we just take longer to die. And, so because those last years are fraught with all kinds of challenges and circumstances that many of us would not choose, right, if we could. And that we have an opportunity to redefine kind of healthy aging by changing the course in many of the ways that Robin spoke to, that we're still mobile, was still able to pursue some of the things that we're passionate about. We're still able to contribute. And all of these things wane with age, don't necessarily need to. And then last but not least, I think is future. In many of the efforts that we have, we focus in the near term. But I think of a lot of the things that are going to bring us to our knees in the mid to far future. So what's going to happen in 2040 when there are 9 million Americans with Alzheimer's? Not just to those 9 million, but to the rest of us that are going to be responsible for their care and financing their care. So I think we really have an opportunity as we pursue this aggressively, which I believe we will, is to think of it in broader terms.
So we know we have to change culture. We know the stakes are incredibly high. We know that older adults are impossible. Most of this session we want to spend on specific ideas, proposals, and notions for change. But Hasi, you're in many ways in the crosshairs. You're the dean of the only school of gerontology in the world. And so you eat, sleep, and drink these questions every day. Let's just talk a little bit more about stakes, about what the potential costs are, what the potential risks are of not responding, not doing those things that we're all going to talk about and need to involve this audience in going forward. So, as a bioscientist who I know thinks a lot about solutions, what are the problems and challenges that you want to try to correct?
Yes, Paul, there are 3 points I'd like to go into today, and I'll briefly mention them. If I could have slide number 6 to give people a visual of the point really that all the panel members have made, and that is that we have made incredible advances in increasing lifespan. And I guess we are not geared to get the slides, but slide number 6, if we were to see it, you'd see that the advances that we made in lifespan extension haven't really been matched by what we call health span extension. And that leads to this mismatch between these two spans, which leads to what we call the disability span, which is getting longer and longer, which is kind of the same thing as what Freda says about we're taking longer to die. So I think in terms of developing strategies for how to address healthy aging is testing our ability to decrease the disability span and increase the health span as a focus rather than lifespan as a focus. So living to 90 rather than to 100, but not spending most of it in a memory care unit of the added years. That's a key point that should drive a lot of the investment. The second point I want to make, Paul, is that we have a culture in this country of giving people advice. I grew up with my mother telling me how to live, and I've certainly gone on and done that to other people. But all the advice that we've been giving people about healthy aging has several shortcomings. Number one, we change our minds every 10 years or so. You know, what is the right diet? Depending on which year it is, it's low fat or low carb. I'm a big believer now in low protein. Is it vegetarian or vegan or Mediterranean or Okinawan? All these medical establishment recommendations seem to be less believable because we are the ones that change our tunes every so often. And the key issue there is that we rely on the so-called one-size-fits-all advice. And that's obviously not going to work in the future when we have much better tools to identify individual variations, mainly genetic differences between people, and the ability to discern very accurately what it is that each one of us is going to be afflicted with, whether we have to worry about preventing Alzheimer's or cancer, and whether, you know, the best intervention for us is going to be exercise or a certain diet, whether we want to work on advancing our brain span versus other aspects of our health. So pinpointing and personalizing strategies for healthy aging is the key. The third point I want to make, and that's, you know, part of your question, is the benefits, the dividend, if you will, for advancing healthy aging, of course, is societal in the sense of having this workforce and contributions of all these healthy elderly now. The second is the individual benefits that we spend all these extra years healthy and productive. But society and the economy can save trillions of dollars just by improving health span and decreasing the disability span. Most of that is the cost of caregiving to disabled elderly, particularly those with Alzheimer's and dementia, which is currently just the caregiving costs over $250 billion a year in the United States. So the opportunities to improve on that are enormous.
Right, and those costs are exclusive of, as you and I've talked about, of productivity costs, which I think it's really important for those who are involved in medical research and policy change. We have to express not only the medical costs of care or frankly treatment, but also the potential productivity losses, economic losses by virtue of the charge on disease sufferers and on caregivers. 50 million or so caregivers in the United States, and you can imagine if we could unleash those people from that very, very difficult work into other productive work, what positive impact that would have on the economy. So as I think we're framing issues, particularly in this challenging political environment, it's really important not just to focus on the medical, on the frankly overwhelming in many cases medical costs, but also on the potential repression of economic advancement. So, Linda, you go ahead, Freda.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to underscore that it's not only the expenditure, it's the or that's set up. So if we talk about the cycle of aging, those things that we know from a public health perspective have the opportunity to change someone's long-term future for a healthy aging. If we're spending more than we need to, in quotation marks, at the kind of far end of aging for care of people with chronic diseases, those that have fallen under the disability platform, then we're not able to spend for improved housing, improved nutrition, improved education, and all the things that'll mean that those at the beginning of the aging cycle have a fair shot. So it really becomes a downward spiral unless we get it under control in the near future.
And do we have access to the slides?
I don't know. Why are we having trouble getting slides up? Person in the back of the room? She's there. She's not. Oh, is it up there? Okay, there it is.
Okay, so if I can have slide number 15, just to make that point.
Slide 15. There we are.
So, as I said, last one back, that's 16, that one. So already in 2010, we spent nearly $250 billion just on caregiving for dementia. And just estimating the growth of the population and the number of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, we're talking in about 30 years, $1 trillion a year just for that. So the benefits, if you could delay the onset, not prevent or cure Alzheimer's, just delay the onset by 1 year in gray or by 5 years in blue, you can cut half of that, $500 billion a year in costs on caregiving just by delaying Alzheimer's by 5 years. And you can get there if everybody would just try to follow the exercise and dietary interventions. We don't need a lot. Just walk 10,000 steps a day and cut out the steaks and the hamburgers 6 out of 7 days a week, $500 billion a year. And I'll take just 10% of that for research. And we're still, seriously, on new treatments and cures.
So, by the way, Linda, as long as we're on this, I'm going a little bit out of order, but I know this is something of interest to you. So beyond just diet and exercise, there's really the question of, and this kind of goes back to the notion of the value of older adults, one's own view of their aging and questions of purpose that oftentimes people have thought of as kind of soft questions, but there's an increasing amount of research that suggests that these not only delay the impacts of dementia, but actually potentially add to longevity, et cetera. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So I'd love to, but may I start with this slide?
Sure.
Because the numbers are staggering. And in addition to not really having a therapeutic approach at this point to treat people who already have Alzheimer's disease, I bet if I asked all of you to raise your hand if you agree with the following statement, most of you would. It'd be rather not get it in the first place. I would bet that's the answer. And so how do we invest in prevention? And the answer is in many ways, but there are lots of intriguing clues. One of them actually starts with education. So educational level is the best buffer we can invest in to keep the next generation of older adults, our kids, from getting dementia. The more education you get, the less likely you are to get Alzheimer's disease. The second thing is doing what a culture of health is focused on. So maintaining health all the way across our lives. If people get to 70 healthy, they are highly likely to be tracked to stay healthy and healthier. If they get to 70 sick, they're highly likely to get sicker and die. And then the question is, how do you maintain health as you get older? And one of the things we know, of course, is that we haven't planned for this stage of life yet. If you were a professor at age 48, that's because the professoriate was designed so that once you got promoted to be a professor in 1900, you would have the good grace to die a few years later. We haven't planned for this last 30 years, and we haven't designed roles for us to engage in. But if I could have slide 4, I'll show you a picture of some public health science for perhaps another approach to prevention of that Alzheimer's disease. Although there are a number that are promising. So what if I told you that staying engaged and active actually improves your brain function? Well, here's a picture of that. This is a brain scan from one participant in a program called Experience Corps, which I see Deb sitting here, which AARP now runs, but I had the pleasure of co-designing, as a public health intervention to create new kinds of roles for the untapped social capital of older adults that would also be good for them. In this case, this role is serving in public elementary schools to support the school success of the next generation of older adults. But what we've shown actually is that people show up, as we thought, to make a difference, to give back, to ensure the success of the next generation. But if the program's designed right, what you see here in those blue areas is new activation of the brain of this person and many other people in critical areas of brain function essential to independent living, to complex problem solving, to making high-level decisions. So you can actually, the brain stays plastic, we now know, into the latest parts of our lifespan if we know what to do with it. So from a point of view of how we build to create a society where everyone gains, this program, as well as many others, point the way to new kinds of institutions that enable people to contribute to making the world better and designing them from a public health point of view to ensure and support healthier aging. And it looks like it works.
So one of the messages of our Super Wednesday is that the doing good for the world may actually be good for you.
Yeah, looks like this.
Terrific.
So, Paula, if I could
Good, Robin.
pick up on that, Linda's being very modest, in her role in this work, and a lot of other people who have looked at this issue of social cohesion, especially with older adults, and all of us again want to have this quality of life and have a productive, meaningful life as we get older. Experience Corps is one intervention, as she mentioned, that helps both those who give and those who receive to experience that social cohesion. And if I had to choose one thing that I would love to do moving forward, it would be to look at more interventions like that and try to encourage those kinds of interventions that really help people connect as they continue to age, keep them engaged and productive in society, and hopefully keep them sort of not only their brains activated, but their connections with other people activated. Because one of the things that we often see, again, at that end of the spectrum, perhaps, that we hope that we don't get to, is that people are very isolated. So it's not only our physical health, but it's the fact that people are often isolated from others and don't have that kind of human touch and human connection that we all want. So I think one of the really exciting things moving forward is to look at more interventions like this that can really sort of help people keep that human connection and help them give back as well as be given to.
Freda?
I just want to underscore also the importance of this, but also the importance of keeping people acutely healthy so that they can do these things. So this is hard to participate in if a sequelae of your diabetes is a below-the-knee amputation, or if your hip fracture has limited your mobility and ability to contribute. So, the thigh bone's connected to the leg bone kind of situation that, all of these things have to happen in concert in order to have people in a position to do this. And to that point, I think much of the work that you've been this is a modest panel apparently, much of the work that you've been involved in has been just that, this continuum of kind of healthy behaviors, evolving a culture, creating a platform that has people their healthiest so that they can contribute for the longest period of time. And so I think that's a part of our role as well, the simplest of things that leave people below that disability threshold or above the disability threshold and out of circuit, if you would, or off circuit for these kinds of behaviors is also a critical point. And I'm not sure that we have systems in place that allow us to do it at scale.
So there's kind of this notion of this virtuous stew of good, lots and lots of pieces. I want to come back to both of you. Robin, you're with your foundation hat on, Freda, with your business hat on, and ask about how we create more energy around solving that. Hasi, you've got some more specific ideas about how, kind of following on Freda's point, about how we can enable individuals on a mass retail level to improve their own health, become more aware of their circumstances, and frankly enable them to do the kinds of work that Linda's advocating.
Absolutely. So, Paul, I'm a big believer in the power of technology to move healthy aging forward in this century. And there are many levels that can happen. How many people here have a Fitbit? So just tools to get ourselves moving more can do a lot to prevent multiple diseases, including Alzheimer's, and extend health span. But there are other technologies that are incredibly powerful. And for me, the most exciting is what we call genomics, which is this big word that people have heard of in the context perhaps of cancer, and how we can identify what particular gene is involved in one person's breast cancer that will make a particular medication effective in her case, or so on. But we can now apply this to individual personalized aging decisions. If I can have slide number 8. And I think the one thing that people worry about the most, you had it before?
Back to 8.
One back, that was that one. So I still have an argument with people whether the lifetime risk of death is 100% or 0. But everything else, we're going to get something else. And whether it's atherosclerosis, which is almost half of us, cancer was a good third, or actually Alzheimer's, which is sort of the big ones, is only going to affect about 15% of us. But if we can measure, and it's very easy to do, certain genetic biomarkers or SNPs that confer risk for Alzheimer's disease, we can identify people who have a 10-fold increased or decreased risk for Alzheimer's. So there's a molecule called ApoE, which plays a role in both atherosclerosis and Alzheimer's, and variations in this molecule, SNPs of the ApoE gene, which you can, for example, measure for a couple $100 if you get your 23andMe. How many people here had 23andMe measurements done? So not too many, but a few. You can find out your risk for Alzheimer's disease. Mine, I can disclose, is I have the 3-3 allele, which is pretty much the common one, and it's the standard. So I have a relatively low risk for Alzheimer's, not particularly high. Friends of mine who are full professors of medicine in various universities actually have high risk. So that doesn't mean that normal, active, brilliant people can't have this risk, but identifying it can provide you 2 major tools to deal with that. So, of course, we want everybody to be well educated, Linda, as you said, but if you have a high risk for Alzheimer's, you want to spend a lot of time with what we call brain training and brain span advancement. There are clear advantage of exercise, and there are particular exercises that work, that delay or prevent Alzheimer's for people at high risk. And of course, diet is a powerful tool. And I can't resist showing the last slides of the deck, I think it's 17, that clearly fruits and vegetables, avoiding 17, it's my favorite slide, if I could have that one, maybe later. But this is also my second favorite slide. Be that as it may, there are things we can do to prevent individual conditions and focus on whatever it is that we're going to get. So if you have high risk for cancer, there are certain diets that will benefit you and other interventions. You have high risk for atherosclerosis. Again, we can customize a program for you before you get sick. And this technology is now so cheap that anybody can, I mean, for the cost of a nice meal next door, you can find out 2 million genetic variations in your genome. and anybody can do it. In fact, 3 or 4 million people have already done it in this country and have access to this information. So we can capitalize on this as a society and provide people the tools to make their own decision based on their own individual risks.
So Linda, what do you think about moving this to kind of a population health process?
So as both a medical scientist and a public health scientist, I would say that we need both perspectives. I want to know as an individual, I want my doctor to know what I should be doing in the face of my individual risk, although risk doesn't guarantee anything. It just is an expression of probabilities. But this is a room full of leaders with responsibility for the society we construct. And from that point of view, because the health of our population matters in terms of the future of our society, then we need essentially a mixed approach, because no one approach is sufficient. We absolutely need to benefit from the technological knowledge and the new cutting edge of medical science for the individual. But we also know that, for example, telling everybody to exercise and creating the conditions in which it's safe for people to go out and exercise is a key approach that we can only take as a society to build those environmental conditions that enable healthful behaviors, including having access to buying that carrot. And then in the middle, there's probably a third approach that we need to think about, which is what I have started to call precision prevention, which is how to understand communities at risk and to then target prevention to the risk experiences that community is subjected to, as well as understanding the individual, how risk varies from individual to individual. Tom Frieden, who is, of course, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has envisioned Frieden's triangle, which essentially expresses what I just said, which is that we have to take the science of public health and of medicine and figure out how to use it in each of those spheres most effectively and in combination, because it's the combination that will create health, not anyone alone.
I agree 100%. I just want to point out that when we make investments into large research trials that will demonstrate the benefit of carrots or exercise, I think it's very important not to take diet and exercise, which are the two big things we can do for ourselves and for society, and say diet is one thing or exercise is one thing. There are, as I mentioned, 10 different types of diets. There are multiple types of exercise, endurance exercise, weights, interval exercises that people are studying now. And we need to make an investment to find out what type of exercise works for what types of aging problems and what type of diets are appropriate for what types of prevention. And generalizing these is key for value and success.
So Hasi, I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair since we only have a few minutes left, and I want to pose a hypothetical. Let's assume, since it's election season, that every single person in this audience had an extraordinary Super Tuesday and was on the way to the White House and was about to appoint you as the chief healthy aging czar. And you had the opportunity to make one or two or three key points about policy change, practice change, risk opportunity. Robin, I'm going to start with you. And you have the opportunity to change the world, since your candidate is about to enter the White House. What do you tell him or her?
So my list is long, and choosing two or three is hard. But here is what I
sound bites.
Sound bites. I would say we need to rebalance our investments right now, that we are focused way too much on treatment and sort of cure, and we need to balance that out more so that we have more on prevention and more doing exactly what you just heard that last interchange being about, focusing both on individuals and on populations and understanding more not only how we can prevent, but also how we can help people manage the conditions they have and help them live that healthy aging life. So rebalancing federal investments, philanthropic investments. We have less than 2% of foundations that fund in aging right now. If you look at any sector of society, the investment in prevention, healthy aging is extremely small. So how can we rebalance? That's one thing. The second thing I would say that I would love to think more about the environments in which older people live to enable them to remain healthy. And whether you call them age-friendly communities or whether you call them all kinds of social and behavioral environments, we need to think about those and how it is that people can thrive in the environment where they live. And I guess the third thing that I'd say is we haven't mentioned too much about technology on this panel, but it's a really important part of our future. And I think it needs to be in the mix of all the possible solutions that we have. And that's not only high-tech kinds of things. It includes things like mobile devices. It includes web-enabled kinds of applications. It includes robotics. It includes all the different types of higher and lower technologies. And so I would put some more investment in that as well.
Freda.
I guess where you sit is where you stand. Research, I think, is absolutely critical, and I would focus on two parts. One is underscoring Hassie's point, which is we don't know enough at the individual level. I had a patient once tell me I was sprouting off, 3%, 2%, 1%. She patted me on my hand. She said, honey, if it's me, it's 100%. So I've kept that in mind, which is, we really do have to get down to the person and to be able to give them information. And I think that we've got the technology that would enable us to do that. We haven't applied it as aggressively as I think we might. The second thing is research on, I'll call them interventions. I often suggest, which makes me unpopular in many circles, that we have Star Wars technology, but we're deploying it in the Flintstones, environment.
Absolutely.
So I don't get why we can know what Kim Kardashian had for breakfast this morning, right? But we don't know what we should have for breakfast this morning based on the latest research. I just don't get it. I don't get it. So I think we have an opportunity to translate both the data and information that we have access to into kind of meaningful interventions, and then we have an opportunity to research and better deploy some of the interventions that we already kind of know could have a potential impact.
Linda Fried, a minute and 20 seconds.
So I agree with the above. I would say that we need to actually embrace both the opportunity and the necessity of having added 30 years to human life expectancy and build for it. And that includes investing in the new kinds of social institutions that could keep people engaged, connected, and healthy at the same time. It includes embracing the opportunity, which is amazing for our longer lives, and how society could benefit. And we have to invest in science that matches our longer lives to create health. One of it is how to prevent Alzheimer's disease. That should be one of our huge moonshots, how to prevent frailty, how to prevent cancers more effectively. We already know that half of cancers are preventable, but we're not fully benefiting from that knowledge. How do we actually also treat people in a more targeted way? Most drugs are tested in young people, middle-aged people, but most drugs are used in older people. How do we know how to make them maximally effective? And then finally, how do we get our kids to understand that this aging biz is all about them?
Absolutely. Hassie.
So Vice President Biden had a chance to do just what you asked, and he got the president to declare the cancer moonshot. We need an aging moonshot. But we should remember, and I'm all for the cancer moonshot, but the National Cancer Institute budget is already 10 times approximately that of the National Aging Institute. So we need a lot more money in this area, and not just a moonshot, We need a long-term investment in understanding, defining the problems, defining solutions, and implementing them in a long-term basis. So an order of magnitude increase in the National Institute of Aging budget.
So aging represents one of the greatest and maybe the greatest opportunity in the history of humankind. Older adults are a remarkable human capital asset waiting to be unleashed, as Linda said. We have nowhere near enough government funding, enough philanthropy, enough research and attention to this. And this is something that's going to affect every one of our lives and the lives of our kids and grandkids, and it's a challenge that we all share. So please join me in thanking our panel and join us in changing aging.